this is Paul. Glad to see a lot of people here. I actually know most of you, so a couple over here, people I don't know. So I'm going to start out with a trivia question that originally the name considered instead of BuzzFeed was Viral Media. And they did a quick search on that, and there was a design shop that already had that name. So Mark Wilkie was employee number 2 at BuzzFeed and was the CTO. You know, I think he had a JavaScript class named BuzzFeed or something like that. So the name stuck, and the rest is history. We're also going to, we've got a GitHub project that will give you access to it at the end of the talk that has all the sample code in the slides. So, question for you. Okay, we all do refactoring, we know what that is. So when you write the code the first time, shouldn't that be called factoring? So last night I was talking with Chad Haas, who he does improv, and he chuckled at that, and he said, some good news, you might have a future in doing improv. He said the bad news is your typical comedian makes about $6,000 a year. The worst news was he said, or he never said that. He said, actually, I wasn't funny, so. So BuzzFeed, yep, we work for that BuzzFeed. Is there anybody in the room who hasn't heard of BuzzFeed? I know, Chad, you said last night you hadn't heard of us. So if you haven't heard of BuzzFeed, just ask your kids. So we're known mainly for lists. Oh, first of all, I have to say there's something screwed up with the VGA dongle. This is all supposed to be red. So hopefully we don't lose anything with that. So BuzzFeed is known for their lists, such great things like this, do the Canadian politicians look like Pokemon, and some language, practical lists, like when there was the blizzard on the East Coast, wording in traditional BuzzFeed standard. And then Jared, this is for you. We have the quizzes they're known for. So, but also BuzzFeed has a highly regarded news service. I don't know if a couple of weeks ago you saw that jointly with the BBC they did a year-long investigation and found pretty good evidence that there's a betting scandal that some pro tennis players were throwing matches. So that was very high profile. Some numbers about BuzzFeed, especially with the news group. They're opening news bureaus around the world, and BuzzFeed, not only, for app developers, we localize everything, but also there's local content. It's not just US stories translated into Spanish or things like that. BuzzFeed also is a technology company. I have no clue what that's supposed to be. I lifted that from another slide. I don't know if that's supposed to be the Star Wars program, things like that. Also, big part of that effort is the apps. These are the 3 apps that are available now, and a bunch of the BuzzFeed developers here today, they were part of these apps, and Paul and I initially did work on the core BuzzFeed app. And then we work with some minor offices in LA, Hollywood, and New York City. But as we all know, Minneapolis is the focal point of technology in the United States. We may only have 30 people here. The other offices have big numbers, but that I think pretty accurately depicts things. It's been a lot of growth. A couple of years ago, Kyle, I think you were part of that. Very small team, and then added some new groups and a lot of people. So this is probably the current staffing levels we have now for mobile apps. And Paul, is that you third from the right, or I can't remember. Paul and I started the same day. So we're also dog and bike friendly. So that's Nate with the house dog Monty, the corgi. And that's Ben Smith with my dog, Baxter. Ben Smith is editor-in-chief, and I came to the realization my dog is 2 steps or 2 levels of indirection away from the President of the United States. So, so BuzzFeed has done video for a while, and if you look at the core video app, that has video component to it, but Paul and I, and then our third person, Dan Patton, wasn't able to make it today. Don't feel sorry for him. He's on a month-long sabbatical in the LA office, and so he's out there with having some fun. So this was when we jumped into it. Maybe iOS wasn't quite that far along, but this is on the x-axis. Those are all the different groups that are involved in making the videos, producing them, providing the web services, CMS content management system. That's huge. That's how the curator and video editors enter it into the system. So our world, we talk to the web services, but there's a whole bunch of folks to the right of that. So, and I hope you like this. This is my favorite animation here. So it's pretty much going up to where we are today. Curation group, they're pretty much full string. You know, the items, the video production, transcoding, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And but pretty much iOS, Android, and web services were almost to the finish line with these. The QA group was built by scratch, or from scratch. So I have another question for you. What is this?
Loading signals.
Loading spinner. Sure.
Whatever. You're right. The real answer, in mobile video viewing, that's the enemy. So we want to obliterate that, or at least minimize that from occurring. And there's a really great way to do that. And it's called adaptive streaming. And so just a definition that you can, no, let's. Okay. That was, this is basically getting to the point. So adaptive videos is names that it has the ability to adapt to different circumstances. And so how that helps mitigate that nasty progress indicator is encoded in it is a bunch of different streams, you know, bit rates, resolutions, and things like that. So, which format? There's, on Android, I would say Dash is, Paul, I don't know if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so yeah, HLS is the most popular adaptive format, but yeah, so Dash, smooth streaming, and HLS are kind of the 3 big ones. So yeah, Dash, I think is, a lot of people think is probably one of the better formats, and Exoplayer that we're using kind of recommends, I mean, whenever a feature comes out, they support Dash first, but yeah, so we ended up basically for a number of reasons, HLS is the format that we're using.
Probably the main reason was a business reason. So I mean, iOS requires it. I mean, I think they support other ones, but it really was the business decision. The transcoding and coding, that takes a lot of CPUs. That's like right up there with trying to mine a Bitcoin. So I mean, basically would be paying lots of money to do it twice. So we settled, compromised on that. I think we would have maybe liked Dash or Dash 2 better, but so far it's been working well. So okay, so we have this video app that we need to make, and we have these HLS format that's picked. How do we get the videos? So we go in the Hollywood shoot, and I don't know if you saw that past slide. BuzzFeed acquired a Phil, what is it? Is it a 10-acre or 100-acre studio?
No, I think it's I'm not really sure, but.
It said 4-acre.
It said 4, it's like that. Yeah,
4
acre.
Thank you for paying attention. We're going to run, award prizes for.
But let's go with 100.
Yeah, maybe. No, I mean it's a legitimate operation. This isn't YouTube videos of people upstream. So I don't know if any of you have heard of the Try Guys. This is my favorite video. Try Guys get a prostate exam. So this is filmed. They produce it in a very high bit stream and also high resolution. So that's the master copy. And then comes the fun part, the transcoding and encoding. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Paul for an explanation for that.
So basically, so HLS, like quite a few of the adaptive formats are pretty similar. So for HLS, the encoder basically turns these, there's a stream segmenter that basically takes the source and then creates these MPEG-2 transport stream files. And then that stream segmenter also makes this index, which is this playlist basically. So the client basically just fetches this playlist and can decide what format to play. So yeah, a lot of the HLS and Dash is pretty similar. So that's kind of how some of the adaptive stuff works.
Any file system experts in the group? I don't know if that overlaps with Android development, but seeing the inner workings of this kind of reminds me of a file system where you've got segments of videos and then there's pointers and things like that. I don't think we have garbage collection. There's the issues with that, but and I also believe that these 10-second segments, they can actually be fetched from different endpoints. So I mean, it can just be a lot of parallel processing, and then it's magically assembled into this stream. So we make this video, then the next stage comes in with curation. So this is Allison. She is the curator for the videos that go into the video app. She's usually behind the scenes, but she also occasionally is in YouTube videos. So she was in one, I don't know, a couple months ago. It's called Women Wear Goth Fashion for a Week. And so in this video, there's like a minute into it, she goes, I'm in a meeting. So Paul, Dan, and I were on the other end of that meeting of this video that went viral. So, 4 million views, and we were on the other end of that. So if you want our autographs, go for it. So. Okay, so we have high quality videos. It's made into an HLS video stream, and we're doing Android. We want to consume it, the Exoplayer. So the Exoplayer, you can buy that for $49.95 from Amazon, Best Buy, and Target, but not really. I mean, you probably know already that it's a component of Android. So Exoplayer, I don't know, Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, so Exoplayer, it's a really amazing media player. So it's an application level player, which means it's a lot more, there's a lot more you can customize it much more than the media player in general. And also, one of the big ones is, in addition to that, and being able to customize, you can actually, when the library changes or they add features, you can actually bundle those changes in a Play Store update. So unlike the media player API, you can really keep pushing out updates. So it supports Dash, HLS, non-adaptive formats, and just high resolutions. It's faster than the media player. And some of one of the requirements are basically it uses a lot of low-level components. It uses the media codec API, which is at an API level 16. So that's the minimum. But yeah, so it's an application level player that uses these low-level components. You're getting native playback, which is amazing. Yeah, it's they do an incredible job maintaining the library, and it's constantly being updated. And
Okay, so we start on this project, and this seriously is the first commit. So I did the first commit, looks like any other video. Now, for this presentation, we intended to show you the development of the app at the end, but ran into, jumpy there. We ran into a little snafu. So talked with legal communications, marketing, about this talk. They thought that was fantastic. It's like, talk about anything you want, but they said you can't show the app and you can't show the branding. So it's like, we're doing a talk on the Exoplayer in our app and we can't show it. But so this kind of reminds me of what they told me. This is an actual sign in Jacksonville, Florida. Enjoy yourself, but you can't do any of that. So, so we go to plan B. This is actually better. Paul put this together. This is a sample code on GitHub that you'll receive if you choose at the end of the presentation. And Paul, are you providing the
Yeah.
Nexus 6P for every.
Yeah, you get the next piece, the next the download.
Yeah, so, okay, so one of the things we're gonna talk about is MVP. With the Super Bowl is tomorrow, so that's most valuable player, right? Or marketing folks, a minimum viable product. I bet some of you, any guesses, Android guesses what this means?
No crashing?
Yeah. A model view presenter, that could be a talk on its own, but we're big fans of that, and I'll go over it. I'll be humbled by the people that know more about it than me. But so the model, that's the easy part. That's the business logic. So it's the POJOs that represent your nouns, and it also has the business methods, to get the information, either most of the time over an endpoint, things with that nature. The view, like in our case, we're big fans of custom views, so that's fairly straightforward. You have the views from Android, and then you have the actions that occur through that view and that interface. And then the presenter, that's kind of like the everything else, but for example, if you do a button click on a view, you will direct that to the presenter, and that will act on it. So the view, all it knows is that a button was clicked and contacts the listener, registered listener, and continues onward. So we like that because it really, it's more work to set up, but if you look at the code from an MVP framework, there's very short methods, sometimes as short as just 1 or 2 lines of code. Maybe if you have a switch statement in there, it's 20 or 40, but it really is compact and easy to follow. So now we're going to look at the code that Paul put together.
So basically, I guess going through this. So I guess I should mention that initially we created this sample because Google's Exoplayer sample is absolutely amazing, but it really accounts for a lot of different use cases. They show like all the adaptive formats. They show audio playback, all the videos. So really, I think a lot of people who are looking at the Exoplayer sample initially get kind of intimidated by it. We just essentially broke it down to do a sample that was focusing on HLS playback, and we just chose a texture view instead of a surface view, just to show that it's really simple to use either one. And for the sample, we just have a really basic project. It's just like we have two activities, one for the chooser, one for the player, and then we have we're pretty big fans of Timber, which is a really great logging library. So that's just being set up in the application. And then simple model that we're just using for the video, the content URI and the content type. Chooser, just like a super small little thing. This is just such a quick sample, so just not much.
I think anything of substance would use a recycler.
Yes, 3 buttons.
Just don't try to do animations in a recycler view if you were in the last talk, right?
So then basically this is the main player activity. We're just.
If you go back to the last slide, I think that, but we also use Butter Knife that's from Square, from Jake Wharton. So that's one of the many libraries that we use. It really cleans up the UI, so very powerful. Sorry, Paul.
No. So we're the Butter Knife and Timber. Their Square is pretty amazing thing. So basically we're embracing the presenter essentially for the sample. It's basically the concept is we have this presenter that is instantiating the player wrapper, which essentially is just the view binds the player and kind of takes deals with a lot of the work. So the activity is pretty slim. The Exoplayer wrapper. This is really like the core thing, and this has really been adopted from the Google sample that's out there. It's basically just a slimmed down, so it doesn't. There's a lot. We just kind of took some of the things that weren't really relevant to this talk out of it. So it shows that you can really get going with not much code. And then we have these. So essentially, anything that registers as a listener here certain events. So when the player, on state change, like when the player is buffering, we can, like we're using in the sample to just trigger the progress indicator when that needs to show up, and then error when if there's a critical error that happens with the player, it'll notify. And then on video size change, basically in this scenario with HLS, the second the video is ready, that essentially calls back with the dimensions, so you can make adjustments, set the aspect ratio. But yeah, so with HLS, since with the adaptive formats, that actually will get called numerous times because the actual resolution will actually change as you're playing back. And then yeah, I think in general we use a lot of custom views. So for this purpose, we're just using a simple container. So there's a texture view, progress indicator, and a curtain that we're just simply just using for the demo. And then yeah, so the way Exoplayer works is basically there are these components of a track render. It plays a specific type of media, so video, audio, or text for subtitles. So essentially, you can create these render builders that build specific, so for certain types of playback, kind of help construct the track renders for that type of playback. So we included the render builder for HLS, which is also comes with the Google Exoplayer sample you can get. But yeah, there's quite a few other ones. So if you're interested in looking at Dash, you can kind of drop it right in and get up and running pretty quickly.
So Paul, if I wanted to write a custom like Steve Vision renderer, I could do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about Exoplayer is, I mean, really, you can really do whatever you want. I mean, there's unlimited opportunity, like possibilities there. So yeah, I mean, it's you can do a lot of customization, which is awesome. Yeah, and then I guess so how we're using it. So basically, we have two scenarios in which we're playing video. We have this autoplay feed, and then we also have the standalone player. So the autoplay feed is basically, it's a recycler view, and we have these video cells. And then the standalone player is basically we're using for anything else where we just need to present a video full screen.
So Paul, is the Exoplayer kind of like, the camera? I believe there's a competing talk going on right now. I mean, so you have the Exoplayer, you attach it to either the texture view or the surface view?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, actually, so the autoplay feed, yeah, we're using, I mean, basically, it needs a surface. So the surface can come from either a texture view or a surface view. It doesn't really matter which one. So yeah, so actually in both these scenarios, in the autoplay, in general, a texture view is a better solution for feed playback. It's a lot more flexible as far as kind of functions as a regular view. And then yeah, I think so for the standalone player, we're using a surface view. I think in general, it seems there's some. I mean, yeah, we didn't really need to use a texture view for the standalone player, so we're kind of using both for that. Yeah, and then I guess going into some of the autoplay stuff, which has been a pretty popular thing. I guess we kind of went through a few iterations, just trying to figure out the best way, and we kind of break it down into a few different components. So we have essentially we have a few components that are kind of this autofocus controller, which is sole responsibility is essentially detecting which view is the most visible view or whatever is the best candidate for playback. And then the video surface presenter and how we're using it in the app essentially receives that, so it notifies the video surface presenter that a view has been found, and essentially the video surface presenter binds to that view and yeah, begins playback. And then we also, we have some additional features too. I mean, like when the user is interacting, we actually, we smooth scroll and snap the recycler view so that it centers the video. So there's, yeah, a lot of kind of interaction between those components, but yeah, so we really try to break up, all the autoplay components and video playback so that things are, decoupled.
So so the texture view is in a recycler view, and the Exoplayer is attached to it, right? And then you can scroll up, and the video continues playing, right?
Yeah, so essentially, the autofocus controller is determining, that all the logic of when the focus is changed, basically, is 100% of that autofocus. Yeah, so then that's all the player knows about is all of a sudden the focus has changed, it has to prepare playback for the next view.
And it can even handle the QA flame test where the
So yeah, I guess, moving into like the performance stuff is, constantly we're trying to figure out how to make it more performant, and we've been striving to do everything we can, and there's always ways or things that we can try to make it even more performant. So yeah, Steve mentioned the flame test, which is kind of a funny because I don't know if it's, I feel like, whenever you start working on a project, you start flinging, but I don't know how often people actually just sit there and fling around. Yeah, the QA, so we have this, I guess, the fling test, and essentially we're trying, when you fling it, we want it to be as smooth as possible. So yeah, constantly trying to figure out how to optimize that, and then there have been a couple handy tools. So Jake Wharton, who I have no idea how that guy sleeps at all because he has some amazing things out there, but so he developed, there's this Hugo plugin, which is actually an amazing Gradle plugin that we've actually relied on heavily. It's essentially using annotations. You can just annotate debug log over a method, and it'll log the parameters in the return value, but also clocks the method. So instead of just doing all this logging, you can just toss these annotations in there and just evaluate performance and how long methods are taking to run. And it's yeah, so highly recommend checking that out.
So Paul, you didn't happen to hear the keynote this morning. You didn't like sleep in, so you missed that or anything. So, but yeah, Chad talked about the memory analysis tools and things. So we use all those to try to optimize things for better performance, especially on lower powered platforms.
Yeah, no, it's really a big with Android too, like how many devices are supported, and I mean it's something really. I mean we're always trying to figure out how we can always make it better and better. So yeah, the Android performance patterns, that's been a really cool show that has some fun stuff. This whole trying to keep 60 frames a second when scrolling. So trying to keep operations under the 16 millisecond window is something that we definitely strive to try to do. So yeah, we've gone through a few iterations, and performance has been increasing. And yeah.
So I imagine there's a few Crashlytics users out there. So we've gotten a few crash reports where I've never heard of this device manufacturer before, and when I Google search it, it's from a country I've never heard of before. They are like running Android 5, so they're fairly recent, but they're
there's
just
so many.
low power, so have to keep them happy too.
Yeah, so it's I think with video specifically too. I mean, it's testing is I think things where emulation can work in some scenarios. It is a lot harder with video playback. There's really not a reliable way to play video on an emulator with Exoplayer. It's not like a true test for performance. So yeah, it's a lot of devices, but yeah, so everything we can try to do to make it as fast as possible.
Yeah, we had a interest from Amazon to try to run this on the Fire OS, so we fired up our handy little, which tablet was it? But
the Fire tablet. Yeah, it's I mean the Fire Amazon. The Fire it's actually not Exoplayer doesn't actually really support the Amazon Fire OS platform, and actually apparently the Fire OS platform doesn't really pass the compatibility test. So they I think at that point.
So our app ran perfectly unless you wanted to play video. So and they forked Android OS. So I mean Stack Overflow. There's a Google engineer on there who said we try to support everything, but it's not really Android. So I don't think we'll be using that anytime soon.
So yeah, some of the other some things that we've kind of encountered, things that are kind of interesting with rotation, handling configuration changes with video. And actually, we're really excited. Brian's given an entire talk on lifecycle of Android, so that'll be really cool to check out. But yeah, so briefly to cover how we're dealing with it. There are two ways that I think as far as video playback. Some of our product requirements are really maintaining seamless playback while rotating the device. So there's two ways. I mean, in our standalone player, we basically just have one. It's a full screen player. And actually, if you look at the Exoplayer sample that Google puts out and the one that we're going to put out, you can actually we're just letting the activity handle the configuration changes. So just declare it in the manifest, and the activity doesn't get destroyed. But that really, if there's anything that has to happen between any additional layouts that have their layout changes, I mean, that's really not a viable option. So it gets significantly more complicated, going through lifecycle events and also trying to make sure that the player seamlessly, so there's no visible pickup in the playback.
So what happens to the Exoplayer during rotation? Because
yeah, so
is that expensive to recreate something?
Yeah, so the way that we've ended up doing it, I mean, we can actually, so we're using some fragments, and then the way that our player can kind of hold on, like retaining the instance of the fragment, but having the views be destroyed. So we can actually keep a reference to the player, and just have the views be recreated. And then essentially, yeah, so there's a lot of, it's actually been a really useful thing for us, and being able to, I mean, there's some techniques with the surface texture. If you're using the texture view, this is possible. Like you can basically hold a reference to the surface texture when the view, the texture view is recreated. You can actually rebind the surface texture.
A weak reference specifically.
Yeah,
You don't want any leaks.
No, it's yeah. So there's actually a really cool example. So Google, there's a project out there which is definitely marked as not an official Google product. I think it's some of the graphics engineers out there. It's a kind of, it seems like a playground for experimental projects. But basically, there's some really cool samples. Texture view decode activity, double decode activity, or something shows like really interesting, like working with the texture view and surface textures in a pretty cool way. So yeah, I think I mean we definitely recommend checking that out. And then some of the links are on our GitHub repository there. So yeah, and then as far as general updates, I mean the Exoplayer has been up. It's constantly being maintained, and they do an incredible job keeping it up to date. So I think they're at version 1.55 now, which just came out a few days ago. So some of the biggest changes in the last few weeks, they have. And so basically, they've determined that Dash is their primary adaptive format. They're going to, whenever a feature comes out in Exoplayer, they're going to essentially try to focus on Dash playback first. And then HLS being the most popular format does eventually happen, but it usually doesn't end up, like some of the features that they add kind of trickle into HLS support. So one thing that has been added is you can now, with HLS, you can manually specify which streams you want to use. So if if you're in your app, you want to limit the bit rate so that you're not chewing through people's mobile plan in 5 minutes. You can basically, you can set limits and only have it select certain playlists, and it's much easier to do that now with these changes. And then also, yeah, just there's been a massive improvement for general live stream playback. There was like for actual truly live streams, there have been some issues in the past with HLS and discontinuity issues. So they've really added a lot of support for that. So I think that's working a lot more effectively now. Yeah. So and then really some stuff that just advice, I guess, especially if you're working with HLS or any of these formats in general. I mean, if you look at the Exoplayer like issue tracker on GitHub, there are a lot of. I mean, it's getting really popular. There's a lot of stuff going on. But one of the big ones is that their HLS is really popular, but also so many poorly encoded streams exist. And what's happened, I think, is that a lot of these other players that exist have kind of accommodated these common encoding problems. So basically, Google, so the team has decided. I mean, they are not going to make workarounds for some players that do work around. They're not going to do that for Exoplayer. So essentially, people are saying, oh, Exoplayer's not working with the stream. It's something broken, and it turns out it's just an encoding issue. So. Yeah, Apple has these validation tools that you can download right off their website. So right off the developer page at Apple, you can get these streaming tools, which basically you can just literally do a stream validator, pass in a URL, and it simulates an HLS session, and it'll tell you, I mean, must fix issues, or if there's should fix issues. So that's really, if there's any playback issues, it's really worth checking out to make sure that the source is correct into specification.
HLS kind of reminds me of HTML being poorly formatted, and years ago I talked to a friend of mine that was working on the Firefox browser, and it was like 20% of the code of the browser was to try to correct poorly formatted. So it's like if it met the spec, it'd be easy, it'd be 6 lines of code. But so similar with HLS.
Yeah. I guess, yeah.
So now he's just going, miscellaneous. Everything else didn't have a category. But this is, I look back of what's worked well at BuzzFeed, both with this project and just projects in general. And one of the things that works well, we have these technology builds. So Kyle, who happens to be here, he's the leader of the Android one. So we're all assigned to a project. Paul and I and Dan, we work on the video app. Kyle works on the core app. Kevin, you work on pretty much everything. So, but we all belong to the Android guild, and it's not just in name. We're, for the most part, physically next to each other. We have some renegades that live in Colorado and New New York City, but if somebody has a question on Slack, they chime in immediately, and we really do, despite all the tight deadlines, support each other. And that's been extremely helpful. So I mean, it's one of those things that looks good on paper but never works, but this has really been helpful. So we have monthly meetings. I don't know if we pay dues or anything for it, but it's that's been extremely helpful. So I was kind of hesitant to do this one because we talked about MVP. There's another one, minimum viable process. And this almost gets too preachy, but I was going to just say, depending on your company, if you're doing avionics or medical devices, you want formal meetings. We're more at the other end where we have conversations, we have user stories, but we're trying to resolve some things because right now, one of the challenges that we have is we have specification by Slack channel. And that's and it's, so we like the beyond agile aspect, but at some point, we need to get things in one spot location. So we're working on that, and especially now the QA is up there, we want a one-stop, we're designing to this information and they're testing it to that. So I don't see the term specification ever being in BuzzFeed's future, but we are moving towards information in a easy, consistent place to find. Okay. And I'll show you mine, or but yeah, we're a big fan of the open source community. We seem to have a love affair with Jay, Wharton, and Square, but that's what we're using. Please don't nick us on the plus signs there. Those are recent additions. So I thought we were going to take those lines out. Another thing, artifacts. So one of the first things I did at BuzzFeed, Kyle and I, we worked on Artifactory, and that's worked really well. So you saw in the build.gradle file, I mean, those are artifacts. They have to come from somewhere. So we have our own, and we have a toolkit or several things. So we try to keep our code across the guild as dry as possible. So anytime we have a method that's really independent of the business logic, that goes into the toolkit. So sometimes it's really subtle things. So, like, okay, do we have a method to say what our, determine our orientation? I mean, that's like a couple lines of code, but that's in the toolkit, and that's been really helpful. And Kevin, you've worked in that, and Aaron, he's the renegade in Colorado. He's very receptive, so if we had more time, we would contribute to that, but we're kind of on the critical path. So just describe to Aaron what we need, and usually within a couple days, that's added to the toolkit. So it works really well. So Tyler's going to kill me with that photo, but that's from his Slack. No, he is the sharpest guy, the nicest guy. He's the tools guy, and if your budget doesn't allow a dedicated person like this, I still implore you to have somebody or take turns getting this up, because it really, really works well. And at BuzzFeed, we have twice a year something called the Hack Week project, and Kyle did one that if you're sitting, how would you describe, if you're sitting on a Jira card too long, or no, it's with the pull request, right? If you don't get to that a certain amount of time, Kyle's process, the Nagomatic, it will inform you of that. So that's been really, really helpful. But all these are tied together, and for traceability, it works really well. So we get a new build, and QA always gets it from the URL from the build, from the Jenkins build server, and everything magically connects to everything. So testing. So I'm not going to get into the philosophy of testing, but pretty much what we've settled into a JUnit, that's obvious. Robo-electric, that helps speed things up by not needing a real device. Mockito, again, works well, so we can do isolated testing. And we've dabbled in Espresso. So have at least had an espresso test. I call it the channel changer, where it aggressively goes through each video and does things. So we actually have one of our QA engineers where she's going to be writing a lot of the espresso tests. So she'll need support from us, obviously, but that's looks like it has lots of possibilities. And we haven't pulled the trigger on it yet, but we're looking at the services that are pitching their wares or their services for cloud testing, and they look really easy to set up. But right now, the price point, even for BuzzFeed, looks a little too high. So.
But then actually, on that note, the thing at the top is really amazing. In this OpenSTF, it was developed by a few engineers at this company called CyberAgent, but it's a completely open source, Android-only test, basically a test farm. You can download it, it runs off Node. It's actually been amazingly useful for video just because we can't really do, the emulation doesn't really work very well. So, I mean, you can, within like 15 minutes, you have your own device farm up and running, and it's super extensible. Really worth checking out. But yeah, it's OpenSTF is what that's called.
So, and then a couple of things we're looking at, let's see, Kotlin. I always go if it's Kotlin or not. Did I get that right? So I think laying down on a cot versus living in Minnesota with a code. If you haven't heard about it, it's really cool, and I actually wrote the tests in Kotlin on our project with a Java backup, because if I had to tell my boss that, oh yeah, we wrote the whole app in this project and it's not quite ready for prime time, I don't think I would have a job. So I think this has a lot of potential. I think if I'm invited back next year, maybe I'll do a talk on that. But if nothing else, it really gets rid of the null pointer challenge, and seamless support with Android Studio, because it's developed by IntelliJ deal. Interop is fantastic to the point where if you in the clipboard, if you paste Java code into it and then paste it into a Kotlin file, it will, to the best of its ability, convert it to Kotlin. So I talked, no names, I talked with a Google person recently, and he just said, at Google, our official language is Java. So I don't know until Google embraces it somehow that we'd convert it, or use it for the actual code, but looks pretty juicy to me. So the other thing, Dagger, that I don't know if there's any Daggerists in here. I believe there's a talk next hour on dependency injection, because that looks really cool. Because even without that, we noticed in our code, we have an awful lot of events flying back and forth, and Java being Java, it's kind of verbose with all these listeners, and Dagger seems like it would solve that problem. So that's it. So if you want to download our samples, there it is. And Jared, I think, is Jared here? You owe me an apology, because you said we couldn't get through 92 slides. So, anyways, that's it. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. Oh,
I do. Does Exoplayer have any facilities for multiple video tracks, like picture-in-picture, for example?
Yeah, I mean, actually, you can do. You can do multiple. Well, it's actually for audio. There's more multi-track support. So, yeah, I think. You can play. With multiple instances of it. You can play multiple videos at the same time. I think some of the stuff in general, just with just using. It's as far as support and how flexible it is on older. Some devices are really limited to what they can play simultaneously. But yeah, we've definitely experimented with playing multiple videos at the same time. But yeah, and there's a lot
and on the same surface too?
No, not on the same surface.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, there's multi-track for Dash too. The multi-track audio and more audio track selection capabilities.
well, thank you.